think go.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the launch of today's Keys to Recovery Report 2021. This launch has been organised in conjunction with Great Homes for Greater Manchester, Salford City Mayor and GMCA Housing, Homelessness and Infrastructure Portfolio Lead and Deputy Mayor of Greater Manchester, Paul Dennett, and the Greater Manchester Westminster Group, of which I'm really proud to chair. Great Homes for Greater Manchester is a coalition which brings together key voices from across the housing sector, influencers and decision makers to get behind Greater Manchester's ambitions to do housing differently. This report follows the GH for GM's Building Back Better Homes and Places recommendations and action plan. The Keys to Recovery report aims to show how Greater Manchester can be a leader in housing innovation and be at the heart of the green recovery. This launch aims to provide an opportunity for political, local and industry leaders to respond to the GH for GM Housing Action Plan and speak out about how Greater Manchester housing needs can be driven forward. We'll be focusing on the 4 keys to recovery made in the report and what Greater Manchester is calling on the government to deliver. In terms of the format today, there'll be a short presentation of the key headlines in the report, followed by a keynote response from Paul Dennett on the challenges ahead. We'll bring in key contributors from GMHP and other voices from across the Greater Manchester housing sector. I'd like to encourage participants to get involved via the chat. Jill and Devo Connect will help bring those interventions into the discussion. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jill.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and also thank you everybody for joining us on this journey that we have undertaken to bring that voice together for Greater Manchester. We started off very much on the fact that, you know, the ambition is there to do things differently. We also have some powers to get on with it. So building on our work from last year and looking at those ambitions, we came up with an action plan. What we've done this year is looking very much at what we need to do to move forward. So it's great pleasure that we're going to launch the event today and the findings. And if you just, hopefully that will now go into the chat. So if you haven't seen the full fruits of our labour, you know, you can have a look at that now. So we asked 4 key questions and had 4 Keys to Recovery summits, and this obviously is our finale. So what we wanted to do is that take those thoughts forward, but how can Greater Manchester deliver net zero homes and places sooner? And I think that's such an important question to ask, because Greater Manchester has such great ambitions, and a 2038 target, I think one of the first to go that far, but we have huge challenges on retrofit and the future, and obviously net zero needs to be very much part of the recovery. So we also asked what more powers, or what can devolved powers be used? How can we use those devolved powers be used to boost growth and revenue, level up, and create healthier homes and places and vibrant local economies? Very much the focus for next year is levelling up, as we all know, and the long-awaited levelling up white paper. And what will be in that? There will be, inevitably, not that I'm Michael Gove, but there will be something around local government reform, what powers we might need. But housing, again, has got to be very much central to that, and the sense of place and how we live, work, rest and play has got to be front and foremost. How can Greater Manchester lobby for the planning powers? This is number 3 summit. How can Greater Manchester lobby for the planning powers it needs to deliver places for everyone? And Paul, I'm sure, will come back on that in particular, because the challenge is huge, but we need to deliver those, see to how we can lobby and deliver those ambitions. And finally, and the one that I think is really important, and I think if Greater Manchester should be really proud and move forward is sort of the work that Greater Manchester has done around the tripartite agreement. We all know a lot more about why health and housing are inextricably linked to our health and well-being, and our indoor environments and external environments. And I think, again, how can Greater Manchester integrate health and well-being with housing in place? We do have, powers over health and well-being, and we do have people who want to move that forward. And I think one of the things that is really key moving forward is for Greater Manchester to go forward on our recommendations. So ultimately, the Keys to Recovery report shows how Greater Manchester can be an exemplar of housing innovation and be at the heart of the green recovery and levelling up agendas. So let's just quickly look at the 4 recommendations and what we came up with. There are a lot more as you delve into the report, lots of ideas of how we can move forward. But very simply, we want this to be a very simple call to government that people can get behind. So MPs and peers that have been involved in the series, but moving forward to say, this is what Greater Manchester can do. And these are our big asks. So grant greater powers, this is number 1, grant greater powers and resources to build back green and net zero homes and places across Greater Manchester. Going back to the retrofit point, one of the big things that we really sort of focused on is that retrofit is not a case of one size fits all. People live in all kinds of accommodation and of age, hard to treat homes. If we are really going to have that green revolution, we need to think about how we audit and know and have a sort of a way forward, so we're not basically wasting time. We've seen problems with the Green Homes Grant, for example, the need for the skills to actually go forward. And there is a really big opportunity, I think, for Greater Manchester to get that right. Of course, we've got the retrofit task force, but this is innovative stuff that we can really do, where we can demonstrate what we can do differently across the piece. So number 2 recommendation is level up and support Greater Manchester's spatial plans and housing ambitions. This is really looking at the Levelling Up white paper as well. But what we're talking about, at some point, we need to think about what particular powers, when we respond to the Levelling Up white paper, do we need really to push forward and say, this is what we can do, and have a real ask from that commission to inform how Levelling Up can work, but also the powers we need to build back better and better homes and places for everyone. So number 3, call for action to government is commit to build back more and better homes and places so that all people who need care and support have a choice to live independently in the community. Again, I think this is one of the really key points, and I know Charlie will come and talk about that in more, or respond to that. But that whole thing of putting health and social care at the heart of the community is so important, and particularly that thing around let's not segregate, let's integrate. And let's use that word integrate, because at the end of the day, it's really important that people feel a part of and not apart from society. And I think that actually is a really good area where Greater Manchester can really push forward. There is a crisis in social care, but it's not just about social care, it's about supported housing. It's about how we can really get more involved in that link between health and well-being and where you live, work, rest and play. So number 4 recommendation, we think we're pretty good in Greater Manchester around innovation. What we need to do is unlock that innovation. So we need investment if we are going to truly level up, and level up the opportunities that there we know, again, go back to the health point, people live in a decent home, you're going to have better education attainment and life outcomes. So it makes sense. So everyone, things around the decent home stand really important, but we should make that and fight passionately to say we want Greater Manchester to that everyone should have the right to live in a decent home. So of course, I actually, and deliberately, I think the findings of this report are things that nobody would disagree with. And that's deliberately so, because we want to gather support moving forward, because we've got the opportunity to demonstrate that innovation, demonstrate that we can lobby and that we have a really good case. What we've got here, I think, is a really strong family and coalition around what Greater Manchester needs. So without further ado, I hope that's given you a really, really quick canter around really 2 years' work. But this is the 2021 version of 4 sessions that we've held, and it's been a roller coaster as we battled against what I'm now calling an endemic, of the corona virus, which is just going on and on. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'm going to pass over, and I'm really pleased to see Paul. He's been a true champion, I think, for Greater Manchester in terms of housing, and he is an exemplar of somebody who really feels passionately and wants to do something differently. So over to you, Paul, and thank you again.
Thanks very much, Jill, and delighted to be here today to obviously consider the findings from the 2020 Greater Homes for Greater Manchester Summit series set out in the report Building Back Better Homes and Places report. Also, what's important about that is the action plan, and obviously what we're discussing today, which is the 4 keys to recovery. So what I'll do, if it's okay, is I'll respond to each of them separately. Obviously, the first one being around granting greater powers and resources to build back green and net zero carbon homes and places across Greater Manchester. People may know in Greater Manchester, we're already committed to all new buildings being net zero by 2028. The city region is also committed to being carbon neutral by 2038. And in the last round of elections within Greater Manchester, Mayor Burnham created an additional challenge with the 50,000 affordable homes within Places for Everyone, where he asked for them to be net zero carbon, 30,000 of them, but also at social rent, deliberately responding to the housing and homelessness crisis we're facing within Greater Manchester and across the country. And when we look at social rent delivery to date, so just looking at 2020-21, within Greater Manchester, we only delivered 227 social rented homes over that financial period. So I think that underscores the scale of the challenge here if we're to deliver 30,000 net zero social rented homes over the period of Places for Everyone. In addition to that, there are some other, what I would refer to as technical or structural challenges we're facing within the system at the moment. Currently, Homes England grant rates through the Affordable Homes programme don't adequately reflect the higher costs of delivering net zero carbon affordable housing. Government, we also know nationally, has talked about moving away from the Treasury's Green Book and benefit cost ratio appraisal for allocating public capital. And as we know, when we look behind some of that activity, it seems to be preoccupied with things like land value uplift. But so far from government, there's very little detailed evidence in terms of how the future of the Green Book is going to manifest itself, especially for places like Greater Manchester and the North. And I would argue that it's critical that the Green Book and the BCR appraisals that are undertaken adequately account for viability constraints, differences in land and property prices, and importantly for me, differences in terms of affordability, i.e. what people can actually pay to purchase accommodation. Currently, within Greater Manchester, 5 of the local authority areas are prohibited actually from bidding through the government's Affordable Homes programme for social rent grant. And that is because of the methodology that the government used that sits behind the affordable housing programme, which basically says that the difference between average social rent and private rent has to be greater than £50 per week to enable a local authority to apply for social rent grant through the Affordable Homes programme. This, for me, fails to adequately deal with the housing and homelessness crisis and the challenges we face within the system. And also, even when we look at local authority areas, you can have areas that, you know, on average don't conform to that, but nevertheless, there's still high levels of poverty and inequality in certain parts of those local authorities. So at the moment, within Greater Manchester, Bolton, Oldham, Rochdale, Tameside and Wigan are those 5 local authorities that currently can't bid through the Affordable Homes programme for grants to deliver social rented homes. And, you know, if we're serious about delivering 30,000 social rented homes at net zero carbon, then we desperately need Homes England and government to work with us on delivering on our ambitions. Actually, on Friday of this week, so tomorrow, I'm taking a paper to the combined authority that talks specifically about the scale of the challenges we're facing here within Greater Manchester in terms of delivering on that commitment. And what that paper highlights is the absolute necessity for a whole systems approach to delivering on that ambition. And what we mean by whole systems is aligning what we're doing on housing with what we're trying to do to tackle unemployment, transition in terms of skills and work. Obviously, we know when we look at the construction industry, there are challenges with an aging workforce, and the industry itself is changing in terms of modular housing, modern methods of construction. Anyone who's familiar with the work of Mark Farmer will know, you know, the challenge is that we need to modernize that industry and we need to align our skills strategy with that. In addition to that, infrastructure is critical. You know, housing isn't just about numbers, it's about water, transport, green infrastructure, off-site energy renewables, potentially, and then also supply chain. You know, how are we aligning opportunities with manufacturing, assembly, installation in light of the changes within the industry? In addition to that, land supply continues to be a perennial challenge, and obviously the One Public Estate work and the Land Commission that we're looking to resurrect now within Greater Manchester is going to be critical to have that strategic conversation about land. And we also know that often, you know, paying premiums for land can then create viability challenges when it comes to delivering truly affordable housing. And I think the point's already been made about the absolute necessity for resources and finance to deliver on this agenda. And importantly, this is about people and communities. It's not just about building homes, it's about building sustainable homes in the right places that also create vibrant and dynamic communities that people want to live, work and play in across our city region. I think what I would say as well on this agenda is this isn't just about building new homes. I think we mustn't forget the scale of the challenge with regards to the housing stock we already have within Greater Manchester. So that retrofit challenge is significant. And anyone who's familiar with the RUG review, University of York, will know that there's a big challenge here. People are often asset rich, but cash poor. So how are we going to finance the retrofitting of our homes for the future? Interestingly, in The Guardian recently, the Public Accounts Committee was commenting on the Green Homes Grant Scheme, which has only upgraded 47,500 homes out of an anticipated 600,000 homes originally planned, and nowhere near delivered the number of jobs that it originally envisaged. So it's quite clear to me we've got to go a lot further and a lot quicker, and the Public Accounts Committee also acknowledges all of that. So government absolutely need to work with us to tackle some of these real structural issues, really, I would say, that we're facing here in Greater Manchester and probably up and down the country. In terms of the second recommendation, levelling up and supporting Greater Manchester's spatial plans and housing ambitions. Obviously, we've recently consulted on Places for Everyone. We're looking to submit that hopefully at the end of January, beginning of February, to the Secretary of State for public examination. It's important to note within that Greater Manchester is committed to delivering 165,000 homes over the period of the plan, meeting the government's objectively assessed housing need. If you put Stockport into those numbers as well, we're around circa 185,000 homes. Obviously, Stockport have taken the decision to pursue delivering their homes through their local plan. Public examination is likely to last around 12 months, so quite a significant period of time in terms of considering places for everyone. And we're looking to hopefully adopt that plan at the end of 2023. What I would say as well on some of this is government thus far has supported us with our brownfield preference policy within Places for Everyone. The £97 million of brownfield housing fund monies is certainly a step in the right direction, but we do need to go much further on that issue. We have huge viability constraints. The budget and spending review recently did intimate that there would be more brownfield housing fund monies available for city regions. We just need to know what Greater Manchester's allocation is so we can get on with programming that money and bringing forward the development on brownfield land across the city region. I think it's also important to remind ourselves what the spatial plan is all about. It's about underpinning Greater Manchester's recovery from COVID-19. It's about supporting delivery of the Greater Manchester strategy. It's about managing growth in a sustained and inclusive way. It's about avoiding unplanned development, or what is referred to often as development by appeal, which can cost local authorities a small fortune and often leads to development happening in places that we don't necessarily strategically want it to. It's about maximising the use of sustainable urban and brownfield land, limiting the need for greenbelt to accommodate development. Development isn't just about houses, it's also about our economy, so offices and industry, creating jobs for the future. And it's also about aligning the spatial plan with what we're trying to do on infrastructure. So, you know, the 2040 transport strategy, the 5-year delivery plan, the 5-year environmental plan that Greater Manchester has in place currently. And it's also about meeting the requirements for local authorities to have a local plan in place by December 2023. That is a government requirement, and it's critical that all local authorities obviously have that in place. Beyond that, some of the kind of theoretical thinking behind it, or conceptual thinking, is to ensure that we have a strong and continued growth at the core of Greater Manchester, boosting competitiveness in the north, focusing on our town centres and our townships, sustaining the competitiveness of the south of the conurbation, where we've seen a lot of economic growth over recent years. Also, it highlights the absolute importance of rapid transit routes. Transportation and movement is critical to delivering on Places for Everyone. And it also highlights the importance of the strategic green infrastructure. For me, you know, greening the urban environment is just as important as protecting our strategic green infrastructure within Greater Manchester. I know in my city of Salford, people living in the urban environment live often 10 years less than people in the more affluent and greener parts of my city. We need to recalibrate that if we're serious about tackling inequalities. I think for me as well, this is also about waiting for the government's Levelling Up white paper to properly understand what opportunities we have moving forward in terms of the future of devolution. You know, in a few days' time, or maybe a little bit longer, we're going to get the local government finance settlement. And obviously that will give us some indication about what resources councils will have to enable us to deliver on some of this agenda. But needless to say, after 10, 11 years of austerity, we absolutely need to start rowing back the tide of resourcing councils who are the front line in terms of delivering on what we talk about within Places for Everyone. I know within the report we talk about a devolution commission for GM and, you know, looking at potential opportunities for how we raise revenues in Greater Manchester. I think what we need to do is just wait for that Levelling Up white paper to properly understand where government are at and how we can shape the future of devolution within Greater Manchester. Also, we talk about securing more powers over consent and planning. I think it's important at this point to highlight the absolute sovereignty of the districts over matters of planning. And obviously we've seen recently reforms being tabled by government, which, shall we say, angered the nation and was certainly pushing forward the disenfranchisement, in my opinion, of local communities from the planning process. In many respects, it represented a developer's charter, concerns for me around permitted development rights. And I think if we're serious about a plan-based approach to how we plan for our future, then we need to be serious about resident and community engagement in this process. And it'll be interesting to see where much of that goes in the not too distant future. But as I say, waiting for that levelling up white paper seems to be a critical moment for us. Then moving on to, committing to building back more and better homes and places so that all people who need care and support have choice to live independently in the community. This we very much support. It very much is aligned to our framework for creating an age-friendly homes in Greater Manchester over 2021-24. And within that framework, we talk about embedding ageing in all of our housing strategy and delivery, resetting the conversation as well with people who could be vulnerable or elderly. They are valuable assets within our communities, and I think we need to stop seeing them through the lens of vulnerable. So resetting the conversation is absolutely critical. Making an impact on the ground, it is all about delivery. And, we've been working with our health and social care partnership to properly understand demand and need for supported accommodation and housing that genuinely meets need across Greater Manchester. Also, part of that is about promoting improving people's home rather than the default always being where they need to move somewhere else. Keeping people in their communities with those social bonds and social ties is absolutely critical to an individual's health and well-being. And it's also about celebrating homes and neighbourhoods that enable people to live well in their later life. I had the honour and privilege recently of joining the launch of Housing and Living Well with Dementia, which is just an example of how we're trying to operationalise some of this work. And obviously that work made 7 recommendations, which we're currently in the process of mobilising across Greater Manchester to ensure people are actively thinking about this, given the challenges we will face in terms of a growing population within this country living with dementia. We need to make sure housing is aligned to that. Obviously, we have the advent of integrated care systems now. And, we need a deeper relationship, in my opinion, between health and housing. And, Sir Michael Marmot, 10 years on, has talked an awful lot about those wider determinants of health and well-being. And housing is very much at the heart of some of the challenges we face as a system. So, yes, this is a really important aspect of what we're doing in Greater Manchester. I'm sure you'll hear more from others in a moment. Obviously, we've got the government's integration white paper as well, which has been delayed, but we're looking forward to what potentially the implications of that are for housing moving forward. What I would say as well, finally, on the unlocking innovation, investment and land to truly level up opportunities for everyone to live a decent home in Greater Manchester. Wholly agree with that, but let's not forget we are in the middle of a housing and homelessness crisis. We have over 4,000 households in temporary accommodation. We have around 1,000 people in emergency accommodation. The annual rough sleep account in Greater Manchester recently found 89 people still sleeping rough on our streets. Thousands of people and households are on our waiting lists, and we know since 1980 over 95,000 properties have been purchased under right to buy. Many have not been replaced. 40% on average find their way into the private rented sector. So, yes, innovation, investment, but we also need to make sure that all of that activity is aligned to tackling the housing and homelessness crisis. Obviously, the nature of the construction industry is changing, as I've already highlighted, with the advent of modular and MMC, digitally and technologically enabled homes, homes for life. We've talked a lot about net zero carbon challenges here in Greater Manchester. All of that, for me, speaks to the importance of R&D, innovation, us working with higher education institutions and industry to come forward with sustainable solutions that will stand the test of time. Those are my reflections on the 4 recommendations. Delighted to be here today. I'm really looking forward to working with everyone to operationalise the recommendations in the report. Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Paul, and much of that was music to my ears, particularly how we tackle the endemic inequalities in our country and sadly also in our city region. Something that I'll come on to in my own contribution, but thank you for that insightful and interesting talk that you've just given us, Paul, and congratulations again on becoming the Deputy Mayor as well. Obviously, now we move to the next section of the launch, which will bring in more voices from the Greater Manchester housing sector. First, I'd like to hand over to Charlie Norman. Charlie is the CEO of Mosque Care St Vincent's Housing, a landlord that aims to act with a moral and social purpose. So Charlie, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks for inviting Matt and I to speak today on behalf of Greater Manchester Housing Providers, and congratulations from us to you, Paul, as well. So I'm delighted to be here. We've been involved in this and sponsored this really important piece of work for the last 2 years. For those of you that don't know, Greater Manchester Housing Providers is very much a collaborative of 25 social housing providers. We employ 28,000 people across GM, and we own 250,000 homes. So what we do together is work at scale, and as Jill referenced earlier, we have the tripartite agreement signed with the combined authority in the districts and the Health and Social Care Partnership to do more at scale. And that's about homes, it's existing homes, regeneration, new homes, but also about our role in place, as Paul's very much talked about and highlighted. We're very much trying to play our part in regeneration, building new homes that are needed, the green industrial revolution, work and skills, and absolutely about health, and health beginning at home and should stay at home and not end up in clinical settings. So, and I want to go on to that a little bit further if that's okay. So fully support all the keys to recovery, and I agree with Paul that it's about operationalising all of this and making it happen. And, you know, a safe, warm and affordable home is key to everybody and to healthy outcomes for everybody. And having a home, but also a place that enables people to start well, live well and age well. We've got loads of challenges, and I'm sure Matt will go into some of the challenges that we've got as well in helping to deliver that. But I just wanted to point out, you know, Paul mentioned about Marmot and the recommendations from that, and about some of the issues facing us in Greater Manchester, and that shocking statistic about people and children living in temporary accommodation. The National Housing Federation, the trade body for the social housing sector, has released a paper today called Our People in Housing Need. It's a report that's been, I've just skimmed it this morning, which outlines that there are 8.5 million people in unmet housing need across England, and 1 in 5 children need a new home of some type because they live in an unsuitable home, whether that's overcrowded, it's unaffordable, or it's just not suitable. So, and the report points out that 1.3 million of those children need some form of social housing, and overcrowding affects 3.7 million households in England alone. So completely agree with Paul around social housing and social rent, and the Affordable Homes Programme and the current government ideology around that doesn't support that necessarily, but shared ownership is also something that should be made available to people. I'm sure Matt will go on to talk about that. So Jill's just asked me briefly to talk about the health and supported housing section of the work, which I think is really important, and Paul spoke about that. I think, you know, it's really critical that we enable independence through our housing work, and health does begin at home, and a home should support your physical and mental well-being. I've been particularly involved. I lead on health and housing for Greater Manchester Housing Providers. I think it's really critical piece of work. And some of the recommendations that we've made within the report are around integrating health and social care in housing, which is what we've absolutely been trying to do with the tripartite agreement. And I think the ICS has got to support that going forward. We've really been making the case for longer term commissioning with ethical housing providers for care and support activity. Investing in new schemes. So we've got a piece of empirical data now which tells us what we need in terms of learning disability schemes, older persons and age-friendly housing. I completely agree with your comment, Paul, which is about not vulnerable, it's valuable. These people are valuable members of society, not vulnerable members of society. But also we've been doing some work with young care leavers leaving care and moving into settled accommodation and employment opportunities. And very much sort of extra care and happy schemes, and right sizing and having the right place for the right time of your life, and intergenerational communities and integrated communities. And just as an example of the social rent piece, Paul, we handed over an extra care scheme in Manchester last year, which was very difficult for the team during the pandemic, but, you know, all credit to them. That is 60 homes at social rent in a brand new extra care scheme, which is absolutely fantastic. And it's been just amazing to see people moving into that scheme. However, it needed £2 million of gap funding because of the issues around grant funding and the difficulty and complexity of building such a scheme. So just wanted to make the point about higher grant rates that are needed for those types of schemes. And that's one of the asks within the report. Completely agree about the better use of one public estate and land prices, especially when dealing with supported and specialist accommodation and age-friendly accommodation. I think we need much more investment in mental health services, especially in this sort of living with COVID world and post-pandemic issues. And I agree, it's not about new schemes and building new, although we do need the new homes. We've got to start repurposing and reusing existing schemes, and there needs to be grant made available to help us with that. Completely agree on innovation, tech-enabled care and leading on that. And then another piece of work we've been doing is looking at home improvement agency type work, better use of disabled facilities grants, aids and adaptations, helping people to live at home for longer across all tenures. So very much working together on that with the CA and the Health and Social Care Partnership. So at the moment, we've got 33,000 types of supported and specialist accommodation across Greater Manchester, but we need 25,000 more going forward by 2035. So we've got to work at scale together to deliver that and help people to live more independently. And I'll leave it there. Thanks, Jill. But really pleased to be here today, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Charlie. That was a great addition and gives us a lot to think about, particularly about how we bring together health and housing. If I can now also bring in Matt Harrison, who's the CEO of Great Places. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I nearly forgot to take myself off mute there, so I didn't want to make that cardinal error of being told to get myself off mute. So thanks for that, and thanks for the invitation today. Great introduction from Paul. He covered off a lot of the really salient issues in terms of some of the things I'm going to say, but I shall continue regardless. Charlie's mentioned Greater Manchester housing providers and this notion of 20 odd organisations working collaboratively. In terms of hard facts, you know, we build as a group of organisations about a third of the new homes that are built in Greater Manchester every year, and that's a pretty consistent level over the last 10 years or so. We also own 250,000 homes, as Charlie said. So as organisations, we have this significant impact. So we build homes, we replace components in our 250,000 homes, we repair them every day, we repurpose them when we have to. So the potential impact of our sector in terms of building back better is absolutely massive. As long as we can all get the right environment in which to work, which is of course what Great Homes for Greater Manchester and places for everyone is all about. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about net zero and a bit about new build as well. So in terms of net zero, our contribution can be significant both in terms of our existing portfolio and in terms of our new build contribution. Retrofit though comes with vast challenges, and we own a huge array of properties ranging from the pre-1919 terraced house, which is one set of challenges, through to the post-war PRC homes, which is still hanging around, through to the more modern stuff where there's clearly a performance gap sometimes between what people promise and what's actually delivered for customers in terms of energy efficiency. But nevertheless, as housing associations and housing providers more widely, by working collaboratively, we can be the vehicles through which we achieve skills uplift and training uplift and delivery uplift. We have the ability through collaboration to scale up quickly and to deliver huge numbers given the right environment in which to do so. And that, we think, has potentially huge spin-offs across the wider housing market, because we can scale up, and our scaling up therefore allows the owner occupation sector and the private landlords also potentially to scale up as well, using the expertise which we will pioneer as we go forward, given that right environment to invest in the homes that we currently own. And that carbon benefit clearly is only one element of that investment as well. The economic impact is vast. The skills and training impact is vast as well. So you get a massive bang for your buck through the 250,000 homes which are owned by the Greater Manchester housing providers in terms of pushing forward with the net zero agenda. In terms of new build, as I said before, about 1/3 of all new homes in Greater Manchester are built by Greater Manchester housing providers. That has the benefit around new technology coming into our build, scaling up around offsite construction, for example. And there's a programme going on at the moment, which again, with support, can scale up really quickly and deliver. And that is our ambition, by working together to do that and provide a platform for the whole of the housing industry to move forward in terms of modernising the approach to construction. That brings the potential for a regeneration bonus. Paul mentioned town centres. We're absolutely signed up to supporting brownfield first and the principles outlined in Places for Everyone. Our town centres do need to be regenerated, and we mustn't be afraid of the R word. Regeneration is really, really important, and that's something which we all need to be pulling in the right direction on, and the report is pretty clear in many respects around that. Paul's focused heavily on the kind of notion on the acute need piece, and Charlie likewise has commented on that. And as housing providers, we're absolutely in that marketplace, but markets across Greater Manchester need to function better. And again, the report kind of hints at this kind of thing. We need to have a whole solution to housing markets, be that regeneration, be that housing for people in acute need, be that for an aging population, or be that for first-time buyers who are priced out of the markets in many, many districts in Greater Manchester, especially around the south of the conurbation. But having said that, within every single district in Greater Manchester, there are hugely contrasting housing markets, and we need to try and lift those which are struggling, and we can do that in all sorts of different ways. Challenges. Paul talked about these very clearly. We've got massive challenges around central government policy, and this notion that 80% of funding tends to get dumped into those areas which don't necessarily need it, and only 20% of the funding nationally goes to areas which is crying out for it. And that's all about the rules which central government apply, the Green Book being a good example. Paul also mentioned the impact of government policy around social rent, and the fact of the matter is the third of those new homes which I mentioned earlier, which we deliver as housing providers in Greater Manchester, we are constrained in the amount of that which can be social rent, and we'd love to do more. We need to have a whole market approach, and we can do far more in a social rented space, but we cannot do so right now. We are constrained from doing so. So I was going to kind of stop there, really. All in all, I think Great Homes for Greater Manchester provides a good blueprint and a great place to put some ideas down. Places for Everyone is a fantastic opportunity sitting in there as well. What we need is a plan. We need to set our standards. We need to push on and deliver the goods. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Matt, and absolutely right in pointing out the different housing markets, even within local communities as opposed to the wider city region. A lot there for us to think about. If I can, I'll now briefly give my own perspective on the report as a parliamentarian, and I hope it will be no surprise for anyone to hear that I am a card-carrying devolutionist. I think that when we hand power back to local communities and when central government equips them with the tools that they need, we can make real long-lasting change. In terms of the 4 keys in the report and why I think they are powerful calls for the government to take on board, what I would firstly say is that on green homes and net zero, I mean, I've spoken before on many occasions about the need to empower local authorities to meet and exceed net zero targets. I'm really pleased that the report notes that net zero transition should not be a one-size-fits-all approach, and that a granular plan to decarbonise every home will require working with community leaders and with residents. This is something that is especially topical in my constituency, Denton and Reddish. It straddles 2 boroughs, Tameside and Stockport. Both councils have committed to ambitious plans to join partner authorities across Greater Manchester in becoming carbon neutral by 2038. They've both recognised the need to get local people on board. And in Tameside, they have launched a month-long residents consultation to give people information on the most energy efficient ways to heat their homes. Crucially, the results will also be used to help shape Tameside Council's own plans for carbon neutrality. Now, I genuinely believe that Greater Manchester can become, and in fact is, a leading light in carbon neutrality, not just across the region, but across the country. But it does need the requisite investment in skills, and it needs national government to trust local authorities like the 10 Greater Manchester districts to make the best decisions for their communities. I think secondly, I want to make comments relating to supporting Greater Manchester's spatial plans and housing ambitions. Again, I think these are really sensible, common sense suggestions. We hear an awful lot about levelling up, and I think giving Greater Manchester a framework in which it can collaborate across the city region and then feed back cutting edge ideas to central government is an incredibly positive step forwards to unlocking regional potential. The third key relates to social care and community support, and I'm particularly struck by the line in the report in which it states that truly affordable housing will benefit those in housing need and help level up and tackle regional inequalities, because regional inequality really is one of the biggest issues that we as a nation face, and integrated, multi-pronged approaches to tackling these inequalities are essential if we want to remedy them. But it's not just about better social care, it's also about building homes and places which are suitable for those needing care to live independently. And it's my belief that these steps should also mean giving councils and communities the power to place housing need above profit, so that we can truly level up our communities, but also tackling those inequalities. Paul talked about the inequalities within a city like Salford, and that is true, and there are huge inequalities not just within local authorities but across the whole city region. But there are also inequalities, really inbuilt inequalities within small communities. So just thinking of the main town in my constituency, Denton, my hometown, 38,000 people live in Denton, 3 wards, and between 2 of those wards, an adult male living in Denton West, where I grew up, will on average live 10 years more than an adult male in Denton South. My best friend, when I was at secondary school, lived in Horton Green in Denton South. I lived in Denton West. 2 kids at the same school, living in the same town, and on average, I will live 10 years longer than him. That just can't be right, and it's something that we as a city region and as a nation have to tackle. And then the fourth key, unlocking innovation, investment and land. It's completely linked to the first 3. It contains principles which no government serious about levelling up should oppose. And I was especially pleased to read the line in which the importance of accelerating the green recovery with the purpose of regenerating green spaces is noted. I know it's a bit of the hobby horse of mine, but the reclamation of Greater Manchester's river valleys in the 1970s and the 1980s, from industrial polluted backwaters to linear country parks, is probably the greatest lasting legacy of the old Greater Manchester Council. And certainly the Tame Valley is the crown jewel in my constituency. You know, I played in those fields as a child. I've walked the valley with my own family and my young children, I understand innately the importance of those green spaces to urban areas like Denton and Reddish. And it's my belief that every community across the country should have access to fantastic green spaces. This should be a consideration in housing planning policy, and I hope to see the government recognise this sooner rather than later. There are obviously several challenges throughout these recommendations. Getting central government on board alongside engaging with private enterprise, local communities and regional leaders, it's no easy feat. but we should be ambitious. We should be able to outline cutting-edge plans and challenge government to better represent communities that are all too often overlooked. And by doing so, I believe we in Greater Manchester can build that healthier, happier and fairer future. So that's really my contribution. Before we finish, I believe we've got some questions. So can I firstly bring in Jonathan Cox?
Thank you very much. I was listening very much to the discussion. What I feel most interested in is how the economic regeneration of Manchester and Greater Manchester can be moved north. The cities that a number of the speakers have spoken about have the areas that a number of the speakers have spoken about are areas that need to be regenerated. There are areas where Matthew mentioned the pressure on the south of the city, and those areas need to have products and innovation so that people around Greater Manchester want to move outside their home areas. And I'd like the panel's thoughts on that.
Okay, Paul, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew. I think it's a really good question. I mean, we all know that a lot of the economic development in Greater Manchester over recent times has happened either in the central business district or in the south of the city region. And Places for Everyone tries to recalibrate that in terms of land allocation. So anyone who's familiar with the Northern Gateway will know that we see that as a key site in the north of the conurbation to create jobs and opportunities. But also, I think, importantly, it's the work of our town centre regeneration activity. So I'm mindful of some of the work that's going on in Rochdale at the moment, where we're seeing the town centre totally transformed and the council playing a really active role, bringing people into the town centre, thinking about how, given the challenges on retail and online e-commerce these days, we're having to reconfigure those town centres to be vibrant places. So it is about food and beverage, it's about culture, it's about the nighttime economy, it's about leisure and how we integrate that in terms of our strategic planning, whilst at the same time trying to increase the population density of our town centres to ensure that they're vibrant places. All of this inevitably creates economic activity. I think, COVID's created some interesting challenges with regards to hybrid working and people increasingly spending more time at home and in their local communities. And as a consequence of that, spending money differently, potentially not spending as much travelling to work and in the central business district, if that's where people work, or in South Manchester, but spending money more locally. And it's going to be really interesting, I think, as we start to evaluate the impact of COVID and think about how we do work differently in the future, how that then has an impact on regeneration. And for your question, obviously the implications of all of that for the north of the city region and those townships across the many local authorities that sit in the north that have been massively impacted by post-industrial decline. I think in addition to that as well, we also know the absolute importance of infrastructure and transportation and connectivity in terms of driving economic growth. And that very much is embedded within our 2040 strategy to ensure that we get connectivity with the central business district, but those orbital routes, if you like, around the city region, making it easy to travel across local authority areas. So those would be my thoughts, Jonathan. I hope they're useful. Thanks for the question. Great.
Thank you.
And Matt, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just very quickly. We mustn't forget that people typically, if forming a home or moving home, don't particularly tend to want to move more than about 2 or 3 miles from where they're currently residing for all sorts of social and domestic reasons, which means that in terms of developing new places, we really have to think about the quality of what we're doing, and that links in clearly with what Paul's just said about connectivity as well. So if we really focus on placemaking as part of our longer term ambition and make make a better fist of what we're doing and investing more wisely, then we'll create the environment which people are prepared to move around the conurbation a little bit more, which again I think would help with that kind of north-south divide piece. Because currently at the minute, if you're living in Stockport, which I do, and I think there's the council are doing a fantastic job there in terms of promoting regeneration, what's going to make somebody who's excluded from a Stockport affluent housing market want to move to go and live in Oldham or Rochdale? It's about making Oldham and Rochdale just as brilliant as Stockport, isn't it? So that's part of the trick.
Yep. Thank you. Next question, James Stevens. James, are you there?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, apologies. Thanks very much to all the speakers, but particularly Andrew Gwynne and Paul Dennett for your willingness to remain engaged with the work of the Great Homes of Greater Manchester and its project. Just one observation first. Very interested to hear what Paul Dennett says about the difficulty of securing social rented homes in some of the boroughs, the northern boroughs of Greater Manchester. I'm hoping that those house builders building primarily houses for the private market will be able to assist with that with the new joint plan. We do at the moment provide over about 52% of affordable houses nationally, and we are now the chief providers of social rented homes. Nearly all social rented homes now constructed are provided by the private sector. Hopefully, with the new joint plan, we can contribute more to those targets. But I acknowledge the viability challenges, especially with the zero carbon agenda. My question is that I've heard what Paul Dennett has said about the sovereignty of constituent local authorities. Absolutely, congratulations to you, Paul, for steering through the Places for Everyone plan. That was a mammoth task and a very difficult political project. HBF is very supportive of that. I've written my representations on that plan in support of many aspects of that. But you've asserted the sovereignty of the constituent local authorities. We have had this discussion before, but do you not see there being a problem in the future where local authorities, if they don't like a particular policy being proposed by yourself or Mayor Burnham or the combined authority, the easiest thing for them to do is to opt out, as Stockport has done? And I would push again for you to have powers equivalent to those of the Mayor of London, because it does enable proper effective planning and the alignment of the things that you're talking about: transport infrastructure, environmental infrastructure, as well as housing delivery. You can deliver that in a properly aligned way. If you have constituent local authorities who can just drop out, then that is compromised. Interested in your views. Thank you.
Paul.
Thanks very much, Andrew. As colleagues know, in Greater Manchester, we do things differently, and part of doing things differently means we take democratic accountability very seriously. People are elected within local authority areas, and at the moment, planning is a district matter. How we've pulled together, obviously, Places for Everyone is through collaboration and partnership, and you'll know it's a joint development plan of the 9 local authorities who are party to that plan. And where we've arrived at is wholehearted agreement for the policy content of that documentation. I think if you reflect on Stockport's decision to pull out, it wasn't necessarily a policy decision that they pulled out on. It was more around strategic allocations within the green belt. So I think we do have agreement across the 10 local authorities about what we're trying to achieve here in policy terms through Places for Everyone. But ultimately, it is a matter for the district when it comes to land allocations and where they want to see development brought forward. But at the end of the day, even with the Stockport example, you'll know in law we have a duty to cooperate. And Stockport isn't out on its own in many respects. It's still an active member of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. The leader of the council holds the economic portfolio within Greater Manchester. So they're very influential and they're very embedded in the work of the Combined Authority. So although they've decided a different avenue or a different route to go down to actually engage with spatial development it doesn't mean that they're not party to what is actually happening at a Greater Manchester level. What I would say, though, is, you know, that sovereignty at a local level is really, really important as well for another reason, and that is the engagement of residents and communities. I am not relaxed with the disenfranchisement of residents and communities from the planning process. And I think it's really important we hold on to that in the interests of democracy and in the interests of doing good strategic planning that genuinely and meaningfully engages people across the city region. And then finally, on delivering social rent, thanks for the comments there, but we do need to go much further. I did highlight in my presentation, we only delivered 227 social rented properties in Greater Manchester in 2020-21. It's great that government's given us brownfield housing monies and we've got town centre regeneration monies, but we need to go much further if we're going to tackle the housing and homelessness crisis. And you're absolutely right, the development community through Section 106 agreements, contributions to affordable housing is going to be critical in all of this, in addition to our housing associations and local authorities across the city region. Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, Paul. Charlie, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add on the social housing part of the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think James makes a good point that I think what we've got to do is work in partnership, haven't we? And there is a delivery between the social housing providers and the private sector. And I think that the point is that there's so much that we need to do. There's enough work to go around, isn't there, for us to work together and not in competition. And I think in particular on the delivery of the specialist accommodation, that's about us using brownfield money and looking, I think, picking up Gavin's question that he's going to ask shortly, working on multi-tenure sites and urban sites and picking up density and working together. So I do think Matt pointed out that we do want to provide more social rented properties. And we are delivering on both shared ownership, affordable rents and social rents. And we're doing that working with Section 106 with the private sector. It's developers who tend to develop out the social housing sector's properties. But I think the thing is about working in partnership. Thanks.
Thanks, Charlie. And Gavin White, your question.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for the report. I really agree on the asks, and I think it's a great document to lobby government, and particularly the point that Charlie Norman made on extra care and right sizing for our older, valuable residents. We know in Manchester there's such a demand for that, and if the offer's right, we can really make some movement in that direction. And I suppose the question is about how do we work together to build more affordable homes and social rent homes at scale with higher density. Given the housing numbers set by government, it will require some quite high density schemes on our brownfield sites in urban centres. And how do we tackle that challenge in terms of planning and viability and look to build the houses that our residents need? Thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. That's a really important point, and you're going to get me on my hobby horse now, because I actually do think we should be really pushing to maximise the use of brownfield sites, because, you know, if we are saying we don't want urban sprawl, and many people across Greater Manchester are saying that they don't want urban sprawl, then we have to have higher densities. You can't have low density and not have urban sprawl and still meet the housing challenge. So, you know, I think we have to maximise the use of brownfield sites, and particularly where those brownfield sites are well connected to the transport network. And one of the biggest frustrations I have is when you see a fairly low density housing scheme granted planning permission on an ideal site for something that could be far more ambitious, because that's just a waste of those sites. And I can think of one very close to where I'm sitting now, the Oldham's Batteries site, right slap bang in the middle of Denton town centre. We're getting 300 homes. They're in the process of being built now, and that's great, but I reckon we could have got 600, 700 homes right slap bang in the middle of a town centre, right next to the motorway junction at Crown Point, ideally linked not just to the leisure facilities and the hospitality facilities in the town centre within walking distance, but, you know, straight onto the M67 and the M60, the orbital links around Greater Manchester, straight on the A57 into Manchester. We could have been far more ambitious, and it is a bit of a bug of mine when we waste these prime sites, particularly in town centres, close to transport hubs, we can and must encourage local authorities to do better when these kinds of sites come available. I don't know whether, Paul, you want to add anything?
I think you've covered most things there, Andrew, to be honest with you. We are committed to delivering higher densities across Greater Manchester, and Places for Everyone does speak to that. And you're absolutely right to highlight the kind of infrastructure-led approach to some of this in terms of the importance of good transport connectivity driving high density development, because we do want people to use public transport. We want people to walk and cycle. We don't want the car to be the default within Greater Manchester. So you're absolutely right. I'd also say on higher densities, I think it's really important to note that this isn't just a numbers game. I don't see this as a numbers game at all, to be honest with you. We have to build the homes that people want. So when we talk about higher densities, we're not just talking about high-rise apartment living here. We're also talking about high-density family housing, close to transport links in our townships, close to employment sites. That's what this is all about. So absolutely spot on, Andrew. I think you've covered that there. How we collaborate in that space, I think we've got great collaboration already, certainly with the Greater Manchester housing providers and the housing associations across the city region. But I do think once Places for Everyone is in place and we have that framework, I think that then becomes a catalyst for collaboration across the city region in terms of how we deliver this. Also, you know, the development team, the people administering all the Brownfield Housing Fund money through the combined authority have done a sterling job to get that money out of the door. And what that has also led to is increased collaboration across the system, working through the structures of the combined authority with the district teams as well around economic development and regeneration. But we just need to build on that, and government need to work with us on this agenda as well, because, you know, viability continues to be a challenge for Greater Manchester. We need more brownfield housing monies to deliver on this agenda. We're ready to scale up. Government just need to give us the resources to enable some of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, you've got your hand up.
I agree with everything that Paul's just said. I just wanted to make a point about CPO, regeneration and complex land ownerships kind of go hand in hand, and moving back into an environment where local authorities have the capacity to do more CPO would be incredibly beneficial.
Thanks, Matt. And I've also got a question from Andy Kipax that was in the chat. He says, the point re-availability of Homes England grant for social rent was well made, but the fixation on reducing grant rates is understandably driving delivery even for those local authority areas that can access to the cheapest sites and areas, which in turn adds to issues of polarisation and housing options and opportunities. Paul, do you want to?
No, Andy's absolutely spot on. And I know Andy's at the forefront of actually working on this agenda. So he's absolutely right. Yeah. What can I say? You know, we do need to lobby government in this space. It's really critical that those grant rates are increased. It's really critical if we're going to deliver on net zero carbon that those grant rates take account of all of that. And also, given the viability challenges as well within Greater Manchester when compared with other parts of the country like London and the South East, government really need to look at Green Book appraisal, benefit cost ratio appraisal, because, you know, if we're serious about delivering a levelling up agenda for this country, we need to get serious about reforming, you know, how Homes England allocates money, the amount that they allocate, the grant rates themselves, but also the BCR and the Green Book appraisal that sits behind a lot of public capital when it comes to infrastructure funding in this country. So yeah, point really well made.
Yeah. Charlie, I don't know whether you want to add anything on the polarisation.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Paul's just said. I mean, I remember back, because I've worked in the sector for 30 odd years, when we had 100% grant for delivering social rent homes, and, you know, to take us back there would be fantastic. So Andy makes a fantastic point, and viability is really tough. And, you know, when we run through our scheme appraisals, it's really, really difficult to make them stack up. So due to the low levels of grant on general needs accommodation, family and single person accommodation, but it gets even harder when you're looking at the supported and specialist accommodation, as I was saying earlier, so much so that you know, you have to make interventions there. So I think it's really difficult as well, because we're now looking at meeting net zero carbon standards and age friendly standards and all of those things. So it's just becoming really, really difficult, and so the polarisation continues. So it's difficult to just keep saying, well, we need a hand hand out for grant and we just need more money. But the fact is that it is really, really difficult to make these things stack up. And I'm sure Matt will agree with me as well.
Thank you. Steve Barwick in chat has said the social care white paper promises at least £300 million to integrate housing into local health and care strategies, with a focus on increasing the range of new supported housing options available. This will provide choice of alternative housing and support options. Would be great if GM got its fair share of this money. I'm sure we'd all agree with that, and certainly from the parliamentarians' point of view, we're going to be pushing to make sure that our city region does get its fair share of that cash, so that we can do precisely that. And then just a point of information on London style planning powers. I think that this was looked at, and I think the decision was that not everything is better in London, and as Paul said, we do things differently in Greater Manchester. There has to be that balance between the strategic city region level and the districts, and it is the elected members, the councillors in the districts, that actually do know what's best for their local areas. And I know, speaking to some of my London colleagues in Parliament, they do get a little bit frustrated when sometimes City Hall overrides the wishes of the local London boroughs and the communities within those London boroughs. I actually think we've got a good balance here, where strategic planning is being devised at a city region level, minus Stockport, although a lot of what is in the Places for Everyone plan will actually help guide Stockport with their local plan as well. There's no point Stockport reinventing the wheel with some of the core policies that sit behind Places for Everyone. That will sit behind Stockport's local plan. But it's absolutely right that it's councillors in Stockport, or councillors in Tameside, or councillors in Salford that decide what happens in Stockport, Tameside and Salford within that framework that is agreed across the city region. So probably time for one more question, I'm being told. Steve Barwick again, fair share would be about £15 million. How far would that go? A good start, I'm thinking, but probably not enough. Charlie, is that right?
Probably, yeah. I was just going to, I put my hand up before about the comment that Steve had made earlier. And just to make the point again, I could completely agree with him that it was a great start to see the social care white paper, the 300 million coming forward. I think it's massive credit to GM Health and Social Care Partnership and the fact that we have great devolution in Greater Manchester, that we've been doing so much work to have a coherent strategy in place with all the districts on supported housing, which has been brilliant. And also the fact that we've done loads of predictive modelling and working with commissioners and Homes England, and putting together a plan for what is actually needed. So we will be doing some, just to reassure you, Steve, is accessing that funding is going to be a massive thing for us, and at least we've got onto the front foot because of the work we've been doing. And also we were lobbying with DLUC and Department of Health and Treasury on those matters. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Charlie. The fact that we have this strategy with the asks, actually, I think puts our city region in the lead, so we can say to government, these are our ambitions, this is what we want to achieve. We can't deliver it because we've got the right partnerships in place across the whole range, from local government right the way through to social housing providers, the private sector, and we can make this work. We can be an exemplar of how what the government wants to achieve can meet our ambitions of what we want to achieve at a local level. And I think that we're in a good place to argue with ministers that Greater Manchester can take a lead on some of these things, and as Paul keeps saying, do things differently and show that we can not just do them differently but succeed doing them differently. Okay, so if we maybe, to finish up, just go through the panel to give your thoughts on a final call for action, and maybe a Christmas wish from each of you as well. So start with Mayor Dennett. Paul.
Okay, in terms of call for action, obviously it's been great to be here today and obviously to participate in this event. I think in Greater Manchester we do things differently. Partnership sits at the heart of everything we do, you know, across the public, private, community, voluntary and social enterprise sectors. But we also have clear strategies and visions. You know, we've got a real sense of where we want to go. I think the challenge for us now is how government will work with us to ultimately deliver on what is a really ambitious agenda that speaks to, you know, the triple bottom line in terms of what we're trying to achieve here in Greater Manchester for people, for our economy, and also for our environment as well. If I was to say one wish, I think one wish would be to significantly improve the number of social rented homes we're delivering in Greater Manchester. If we're going to get anywhere near to delivering the target of 30,000 net zero carbon social rented homes over the period of Places for Everyone, then we really need to all be working all arms to the pump, as it were, to actually deliver on that mayoral ambition that Andy Burnham has set for all of us. And that, for me, is critical for a whole host of other things. It puts money in people's pockets to spend in the local economy. It helps us tackle the housing and homelessness crisis. And if we deliver it net zero carbon, it also puts pressure on the market, much needed pressure on the market, to transition to net zero carbon homes quicker than we are currently. So for all of those reasons, that would be my ask, and for the system to collaborate in that space, as well as the community and voluntary sector through community-led housing. I think they have a role as well in all of this. So that would be my one wish. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Paul. And Charlie.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I'd agree with the relationships and the partnerships thing. I think we got over ourselves as individual organisations a long time ago, and we worked together at a scale. So I think keep going with that. Keep integrating the health and social care and housing. They're absolutely intrinsically linked. It's just so key. I think that the Independent Inequalities Commission and the Marmot report and things like that are really, really key, that we operationalise the recommendations from those. And for me, the one ask is about delivering those 25,000 specialist and supported and age-friendly accommodation for people, so that people can live independently and healthier, longer, happier lives, because we have got huge health inequalities in the region. So, and we'll keep working together at scale and lobbying to make that happen.
Thanks. And Matt.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think I'd just say it's great we're talking about housing. Housing for many years, hasn't it? It's been a bit of a Cinderella kind of politically, and the number of housing ministers we've had over the last 15 years tells you quite a lot about what central government's priorities have been over that time. But it's great to be talking about housing. Housing can be an accelerator for the economy. In terms of skills, and training can be an accelerator in terms of social benefit and for society in general. We can be an accelerator around the green revolution and around regeneration of our towns. For health, wealth, everything comes from housing. So it's great that we're talking about it and putting forward some ideas through this report. I guess in terms of the Christmas wish, it would be around the levelling up white paper, really. It's imminent. We've got a new minister. I just hope my Christmas wish would that he's been in listening mode, and he's listening to what we need not just in Greater Manchester but in the north of England, and that we can get away from party lines and just do the right thing. And this is a massive opportunity to do that.
Thanks, Matt. And I suppose my Christmas wish is that we have that relentless battle against inequalities, and it's a battle we have to fight in Greater Manchester, because too many people are being held back, not because they don't have the potential, they do, but that potential isn't being unlocked for them. And the challenge for all of us, particularly the politicians, local and national, is to unlock that potential, because our city region's great. It's the people who make our city region. And we know that if we can give everybody the opportunities that they deserve, we can be so much better, so much as a leader in industry, in commerce, in academia, and in doing great things. And so really battling against inequality, I think, is key going forwards. I'd just like to echo some of the comments made by Paul, Charlie and Matt, and particularly that good housing is key to everything we want to do, to the health and well-being of the citizens, right the way through to ensuring that we can live safely and securely in old age or with disability, and in comfort. And you know, we all want to see that regeneration is key, and I'm so proud of some of the work that councils, we've mentioned Rochdale, but I want to give a big plug to Stockport, because the regeneration of Stockport town centre is just so ambitious and so exciting. And it's only a few years ago that if you'd even suggested some of these schemes, you'd have been laughed out of Greater Manchester for being completely crazy. And yet that transformation's happening before our eyes. And I want to also say thank you to you, Paul, for being a leader on social housing. Salford have done great things, genuinely great things. And I think really show the rest of the city region how you can have that glitzy regeneration, but also have mixed communities, have people from a diverse set of socio-economic backgrounds living together in a way that I wish other parts of Greater Manchester would learn, and hopefully will learn. And then lastly, you know, we do need to have that frank conversation about support for our regions and city regions with central government, because you know, if we don't call out government when they're falling short, nobody else will. And that's why I'm so grateful to Great Homes for Greater Manchester, to Devo Connect, representatives from the Greater Manchester Westminster Group for facilitating such a productive and thought-provoking launch. It's very exciting that we have collaborative, joined-up suggestions relating to housing policy, as well as input from a broad coalition of thinkers. I know that if we continue to work empowering local communities and regional voices, we can build a more prosperous future. Jill, you've got your hands up.
I just really wanted to say thank you, but also to say, where do we go from here? Because it's been a great launch, you know, and we've got a great, you know, collaboration going here, and it is very much around how we can bring MPs and political leaders and the GMCA all together to make that voice really heard. And that is the ultimate point of what we are doing. There's been some, I think the 4 keys, you know, are really good foundations for that lobbying exercise. And I think that's been demonstrated today. I think for next year, you know, it is around gearing up that lobbying activity, putting housing, you know, at the centre of net zero, levelling up, you know, and social care. I think is a really good place for us to be. I'm picking up not just on this one, but also the role of Homes England, and I think that Paul's referenced it as well. And I think there's I think that whole thing about, you know, the economics really of the housing market, and you know, how it actually works to deliver is really important. So I think that's another area we could focus in on as well. But I'm keen, and I think everybody else on the call will be keen to really grasp you know, the policy making agenda as such. We know, well, I don't know exactly what's when it's going to be. I've heard all kinds of dates, early in January for the levelling up white paper. But as I say, it is a competition really, and we need to make some of the points that have been made on this call about the inter-regional disparities and inequalities, which we know exist. You know, this north-south, you know, it shouldn't be where you live. We need to really do what the report says, you know, do things differently, and really be that exemplar to sort of government to say, well, this would work. So they've got, you know, at the end of the day, the ultimate answer to all these questions is that it's not enough. We need, you know, because we live in unprecedented times. So whether it's social care or whatever, we need to be lobbying for more. And ultimately, we have more powers. We can do what we want to do. So I just really want to say my wish is let's keep it going. And as always, I just think everybody involved, thank you so much for all the time and effort we put in, and I look forward to working with you in the new year.
Thanks, Jill. There's little else for me to add after that, other than I think this is going to be a huge priority for the Greater Manchester Westminster Group in Parliament, to be really using our MPs to lobby to make this this strategy and the 4 key asks a priority of government, so that we can deliver on it. It's not just a document that gathers dust, but it's something that we can achieve. I'd like to thank you, Jill, and everybody at Devo Connect for all your hard work for putting this launch together. Thanks also to Paul, Charlie and Matt for their brilliant contributions and their answers to all the questions. Thanks to everyone who attended. I know that as we edge closer to what will probably be a slightly surreal Christmas, time can sometimes be really hard to find, but it's been really great to see people interested in and engaged in how we can improve housing across Greater Manchester. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great Christmas, stay safe, and here's to a much better, happier 2022. Thank you.